Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The heat on Ashgar was a physical presence, a weight that settled in the lungs and clung to the skin like a film of fine dust. Cale felt it even through the climate-controlled shell of his Warden armor, a persistent, oppressive warmth that seeped through seals and synthetic muscle fibers. He stood on the Ferrocrete landing pad, watching the shuttle descend, its engines screaming a protest against the thin, rust-colored atmosphere. For 10 years, this had been his world, the sterile gray of Axiom Corporation facilities and the dying red of the planet they were bleeding dry. He was a relic, a man built for wars that were over, now assigned to guard a strip mining operation on the fringe of explored space. His past was a collection of fractured memories, breached hulls, the silent drift of bodies in the void, the cold satisfaction of a contract fulfilled. Here, his duties were mundane, his skills atrophying. He managed security patrols, oversaw prisoner transfers, and filed reports that vanished into the corporate data stream. Disillusionment was a slow poison, and Cale had been drinking it for a long, long time. The shuttle settled with a sigh of hydraulics. The ramp lowered, disgorging a squad of Axiom enforcers in their polished black carapaces, their rifles held at a parade ground ready. Between them walked Administrator Forlag, a man whose soft physique was a testament to a life lived far from the hardships he imposed on others. Behind him, secured between two grav poles, floated the reason for this official visit. The asset. Cale had seen the preliminary reports. Indigenous life form, designated Subject 734. The last of its kind, captured near the geologically unstable region of the Great Chasm. The Kith, the survey teams had called them. Primitives. They had been a nuisance, sabotaging mining equipment with crude tools, then melting back into the canyons. Now, they were just an appendix in a corporate report, a problem solved. He approached the procession, his helmet retracting with a hiss. The air tasted of metal and scorched earth. Administrator, he said, his voice a low gravel. The containment wing is prepped and secured. Forlag offered a thin, dismissive smile. Excellent, Warden. See that it stays that way. This specimen is unique. It displayed certain energetic properties during capture. We cannot afford any complications. Cale's gaze shifted to the creature floating between the humming poles. It was humanoid in shape, but taller, impossibly slender, with skin the color of pale, water-worn stone, marked with faint, swirling patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Long, white hair, matted with red dust, obscured its face. It was bound in energy cuffs, yet it held itself with a stillness that was not surrender, but a deep and unnerving patience. It was female. The report had noted that. The last of her line. He followed them into the facility, the corridors echoing with the rhythmic clamp of armored boots. The air grew cooler, sterile, stripping away the planet's oppressive heat. They moved to the deepest level, to a high-security cell designed for rogue synthetics and corporate spies. A transparent plasteel wall separated the observation chamber from the stark, white cube of the cell itself. The enforcers guided the floating Kith inside, deactivated the grav poles, and withdrew, the heavy door sliding shut with a solid, final thud. For the first time, the creature moved. It slowly raised its head, and Cale saw its face. It was not monstrous. The features were fine, almost delicate, but etched with a profound weariness. Its eyes, however, were what held him. They were large and completely black, like pools of liquid night, and they seemed to absorb the harsh light of the cell without reflection. They scanned the observation room, passing over Forlag and his men, and then they settled on Cale. He felt a strange, unwelcome jolt, a flicker of something that was not pity, but recognition. He had seen that look before, in the eyes of cornered soldiers and doomed civilians on a dozen war-torn worlds. It was the look of a being that had lost everything but its will. Forlag chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. Fascinating, isn't it? A living fossil. Its biology seems to interact with the cinderstone deposits. We believe it can lead us to the primary vein. Once we have extracted that information, it will be dissected for further study. Cale said nothing. His job was to follow orders, to maintain the security of the facility. The morality of Axiom's work was above his pay grade, a truth he had long ago accepted to preserve his own sanity. For 3 rotations, he stood watch. Forlag and his scientists came and went, running scans, projecting sonic frequencies into the cell, attempting to provoke a reaction. The Kith female remained motionless, standing in the center of the room, her eyes open, her breathing so slow and shallow it was almost imperceptible. She refused food, refused water. She was simply waiting. On the 4th rotation, during the quietest hours of the station's night cycle, Kale was alone in the observation chamber. The rest of the facility hummed with the low thrum of life support and processing machinery. He watched the captive, and the silence in the cell felt louder than the noise around him. He saw a tremor run through her long limbs. Her lips, pale and cracked, parted slightly. She was dying of thirst. He did not know why he did it. It was not a conscious decision. It was an impulse, a ghost of a man he used to be. Protocol was clear, no direct interaction, no unauthorized entry. He ignored it. He keyed in his command override, a code reserved for catastrophic emergencies. The heavy door to the cell hissed open. He stepped inside, carrying a standard-issue water pouch. The air in the cell was cold and still. The Kith did not move, but her black eyes followed him, tracking his every step. He stopped a few feet from her, keenly aware of the energy cuffs binding her wrists, aware of the unknown power she supposedly possessed. He held out the water. She did not take it. She simply watched him, her gaze unwavering. He unsealed the pouch and knelt, pouring a small pool of clean, clear water onto the sterile white floor. It was a simple offering, an acknowledgement. He was a guard. She was a prisoner. But in that moment, they were just 2 living things in a sterile box, surrounded by a dying world. He backed away and resealed the cell. He deleted the entry from the security log, a minor act of treason that felt surprisingly significant. From the observation room, he watched. After a long moment, the Kith female slowly, gracefully, knelt. She did not drink. Instead, she dipped her fingers into the small puddle and traced a single, complex symbol on the floor. As her fingers moved, the water glowed with a soft, internal luminescence. Then the symbol flared. A wave of force, silent and invisible, slammed into the plasteel wall. The entire facility shuddered. Red lights flashed to life, and a klaxon began to blare, a raw, mechanical scream that shattered the quiet. The energy cuffs on her wrists sparked violently and then dissolved into nothing. The power grid flickered, plunging the corridor into a chaotic strobe of light and darkness. Kale stared, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip. The act of compassion, the smallest possible transgression, had broken the world. The dormant power had been unleashed. The alarms shrieked a litany of system failures and security breaches. He could hear the thunder of armored boots approaching from down the hall. Forlag would be here in moments, with Valerius and his enforcers. They would not ask questions. They would see an open cell, a freed captive, and a warden who had broken every rule. He had 2 choices. He could stand his ground, try to explain the inexplicable, and be executed for treason. Or he could run. The Kith female, Lyra, as he would come to know her, turned her head and looked directly at him through the plasteel. There was no malice in her eyes. There was only an invitation. She raised a hand and pressed her palm against the transparent wall. On his side, the surface frosted over, the cold radiating outward. He felt it not as a threat, but as a question. The approaching footsteps grew louder, angrier. He made his choice. It was not a choice for a cause, or for her. It was a choice against them, against Forlag and Axiom and the sterile, predictable death they offered. He slammed his fist on the emergency release panel for the observation room's outer door, overriding the lockdown. It slid open into a secondary maintenance corridor. He glanced back. Lyra was still watching him. With a final, decisive move, he triggered the cell's emergency purge system. It was meant to vent contaminants into the planet's atmosphere. He knew it would also shatter the plasteel wall. With a deafening crack, the transparent barrier exploded inward. He didn't wait to see more. He plunged into the maintenance tunnel, his rifle in his hands, the klaxons chasing him like the hounds of hell. The system was in chaos. He was no longer a warden. He was a fugitive, and he had just unleashed a power he could not possibly comprehend upon the ordered, brutal world of Axiom. The hunt had begun. The maintenance corridors were a maze of pipes and cabling, smelling of ozone and recycled air. Kale moved with the fluid economy of a predator, his years of training taking over where conscious thought failed. The facility's public address system crackled to life, Valerius's voice cutting through the alarms, sharp and cold as shattered glass. Warden Kale, designated traitor. Surrender immediately. All units, lethal force is authorized. He knew Valerius would enjoy this. They had a history, two sides of the same tarnished corporate coin. Valerius was the zealot, Kale the cynic. Now, that distinction was irrelevant. He was just another target. He heard a soft sound behind him and spun around, rifle raised. It was her, the Kith female. She moved through the dim corridor with an impossible silence, her pale form seeming to glide over the grated floor. She was not following him, she was walking with him. An unspoken, unnegotiated alliance had formed in the chaos of their escape. This way, he grunted, more to himself than to her. He led them deeper into the guts of the facility, towards a cargo loading bay on the far side of the complex. It was their only chance. The main hangars would be locked down tight. They rounded a corner and came face to face with a pair of enforcers. There was a frozen moment of shock on the soldiers' faces under their visors. Kale didn't hesitate. His rifle fired twice, the crack of the pulse rounds deafening in the enclosed space. The enforcers crumpled, their armor smoking. Before he could move on, more footsteps echoed from ahead. They were being boxed in. He flattened himself against a wall, peering around the junction. A full squad, led by Valerius himself. Nowhere to run, Kale. The commander's voice boomed, amplified by his helmet. Kale felt a cold certainty settle over him. This was it. A dead end in a utility tunnel on a forgotten planet. A fitting end for a man who had stopped believing in anything. Then, the Kith moved past him. She stepped calmly into the center of the corridor, facing the approaching squad. Her hands were empty, her posture relaxed. Get back, Kale hissed, but she ignored him. Valerius laughed. The pet thinks it can fight. Open fire. The corridor erupted in a storm of pulse energy. Kale flinched, expecting to see her torn apart. But the brilliant red bolts of energy never reached her. They stopped a foot from her body, dissipating against an invisible barrier that shimmered like heat haze. She raised one slender hand, palm outward, and the air itself seemed to thicken, to grow heavy. The enforcers staggered, their movements becoming sluggish as if they were wading through deep water. The lights in the corridor flickered and died, plunging them into near total darkness, lit only by the faint, shifting patterns on the Kith's skin. Then, with a gesture as simple as closing a fist, she pushed. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floor and up Kale's bones. The squad of enforcers was thrown backward, their armored forms slamming into the far wall with enough force to dent the metal plating. They collapsed in a tangled heap, groaning and unconscious. Valerius, tougher or luckier than his men, was on one knee, his helmet cracked, struggling to raise his rifle. Kale saw his chance. He lunged forward, his boot connecting with Valerius's wrist, sending the rifle clattering away. He brought the butt of his own weapon down on the commander's helmet, and Valerius slumped to the floor. Kale stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline singing in his veins. He looked at the Kith. She stood serenely in the darkness, the glow from her skin casting long, dancing shadows. She was impossibly powerful, yet he had seen her trembling from dehydration only an hour before. A powerhouse, and yet vulnerable. He realized with a chilling clarity that Axiom had not captured a creature, they had caged a force of nature. And he had just let it out. Without a word, she turned and continued down the corridor. Kale fell into step behind her. Their dynamic was one of wary observation. He was her guide through the metal labyrinth, and she was his shield against the weapons of their pursuers. A partnership of necessity, born in violence. They reached the cargo bay without further incident. The massive outer doors were sealed, but a smaller personnel airlock was nearby. Kale sliced through the control panel with a maintenance torch from his belt kit, showering the floor in sparks. The inner door hissed open. As they cycled through the airlock, Kale risked a look back through the reinforced porthole. The bay was filling with enforcers. They were swarming, organized, their momentary confusion replaced by cold fury. The outer door opened, and the red dust of Ashgar swirled in. The air was thin and bit at his lungs. The Kith seemed to drink it in, her posture straightening, the faint light on her skin growing a little brighter. They were outside. Free, for the moment. They ran. The terrain beyond the facility was a brutal expanse of fractured rock and deep, shadowy canyons, the legacy of Axiom's relentless strip mining. The twin moons of Ashgar cast a pale, ghostly light over the landscape, making it a treacherous place to navigate. For hours they moved through the broken land, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter behind them. Kale's armor compensated for the thin atmosphere, but the physical exertion was grueling. The kith moved with an eerie, tireless grace, her bare feet finding purchase on surfaces that would have sent him sliding into the abyss. They took shelter in a shallow cave carved out by ancient winds. Kale deactivated his armor's external lights and sat with his back against the rock, his rifle across his knees. The kith stood at the mouth of the cave, a pale silhouette against the star-dusted sky. The silence between them was vast, filled with unspoken questions. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine cut through the night. Kale recognized it instantly. A survey drone. Its searchlight swept across the canyon wall, getting closer. He cursed under his breath. They had been found. Down, he yelled, pulling her back from the cave entrance. The drone hovered, its optical sensor glowing a malevolent red. It had them pinned. In seconds, it would transmit their coordinates, and the sky would fill with gunships. Kale raised his rifle, but he knew the drone's armor would deflect the pulse rounds. He made a split-second decision. Stay here, he ordered, and scrambled out of the cave, using the rock formations for cover. He had to draw its fire, lead it away from her. It was a stupid, suicidal plan. It was the only one he had. The drone spotted his movement and locked on. A stream of superheated plasma bolts erupted from its underbelly, stitching a line across the rocks where he had been a second before. Stone vaporized, glowing orange in the darkness. He ran, dodging and weaving, the plasma bolts exploding around him. He slid into a narrow crevice, his shoulders slamming into the rock. Pain flared through him. The drone was directly overhead, preparing for another volley. He was trapped. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end. It never came. He heard a sound like shattering crystal, and the plasma fire stopped. He opened his eyes and looked up. The drone was gone. In its place, floating in the air, was the kith. She held the drone's wreckage in a shimmering field of energy, crushing it into a compact ball of twisted metal and wires. She let it fall, and it clattered down the cliff face into the darkness below. She descended lightly, landing beside him. She looked at his shoulder, where his armor was blackened and partially melted from a near miss. Then she looked at him, her black eyes searching his face. In that moment, he understood. He had tried to save her, and in turn, she had saved him. The first act of mutual protection. The first thread in a bond that went deeper than words. He nodded slowly, a gesture of acknowledgement, of thanks. She responded with a gesture of her own. From a fold in the simple cloth she wore, she produced a small, sharp shard of black obsidian. It glinted in the moonlight. Before he could react, she drew the sharp edge across her own palm. A line of silver, luminous blood welled up. It did not drip. It seemed to cling to her skin, glowing softly. Then she held the shard out to him. It was not a threat. It was a ritual, a greeting, an offering. He hesitated for only a second. He held out his own gauntlet hand. She shook her head, her gaze fixed on his. He understood. He unsealed and removed his right gauntlet, exposing his bare hand to the thin, cold air. He took the obsidian shard from her. Its edge was keen as a razor. He mirrored her action, drawing it firmly across his own palm. The pain was sharp, clean. Red blood, dark and shockingly mundane compared to hers, beaded along the cut. It bled more freely than hers had, a testament to their different biologies. He looked at her, at the mingling of his blood and the red dust on his hand, and for the first time in years, a genuine, unforced smile touched his lips. It was a small, grim thing, but it was real. He had accepted the pain, accepted the gesture. He had met her on her own terms. She reached out and gently touched her silver-blooded palm to his. He felt no pain, only a strange warmth that spread up his arm, and a sudden, overwhelming flood of images and feelings in his mind. He saw deserts of black sand under a vibrant green sky. He saw cities of living crystal, humming with a music he could feel in his bones. He saw the arrival of the first Axiom ships, great metal scars on the horizon. He felt a sorrow so profound it was a physical ache, the grief of a dying world, of a people lost to memory. And through it all, a single concept, a name, echoed in his thoughts, projected from her mind to his. It was not a word, but a meaning, a title bestowed. Protector. The shared ordeal of their journey across the blasted plains of Ashgar forged their bond in silence and hardship. Days were spent hiding from Axiom patrols in the shadows of colossal, rust-eaten mining machines that stood like the skeletons of forgotten gods. Nights were a relentless march under the cold gaze of the twin moons. Kale's armor recycled his water and provided nutrient paste, but Lyra seemed to draw sustenance from the very air, from the faint moonlight. She grew stronger the further they got from the sterile confines of the Axiom facility. Their communication evolved beyond simple gestures. She would touch his arm, and he would understand they needed to change direction, sensing a patrol he could not see or hear. He, in turn, learned to read the subtle shifts in the light patterns on her skin. A slow, gentle pulse meant calm. A rapid, sharp flicker signaled danger. One evening, as they rested in the lee of a wind-scoured mesa, she led him to a flat, sheltered rock face. Using a piece of charcoal from a long-dead, petrified tree, she began to draw. Her movements were fluid and precise. She drew the planet, not as a globe, but as a living, breathing entity, a web of interconnected lines of light. She drew the kith, her people, not as figures upon the land, but as part of the web, tenders of the light. Then she drew Axiom's machines, great, dark drills that stabbed into the web, breaking the lines, drinking the light. She drew the cinder stone they mined, and Kale understood with a sickening lurch of comprehension. It was not a mineral. It was the planet's crystallized lifeblood, its nervous system. Axiom was not just mining a planet, they were lobotomizing it. She pointed to the largest drill on her drawing, the one at the heart of the web, and then looked to the north, where a faint, persistent glow stained the horizon. The central processing facility, the place Forlag called the heart. It was the source of the planet's slow death. She traced a broken line of light leading from it, and then touched her own chest. She was a part of it, a severed connection. She was not just a guardian. She was a failsafe, a living key, the part of the planet that could heal the rest. This was the hidden truth. The conflict was not over resources. It was a war of extermination waged by an enemy who did not even know they were fighting a war. To Forlag, Ashgar was a lump of rock rich in a valuable commodity. To the Kith, it was their mother, their god, their entire universe. And Lyra was its last, desperate hope. Kale's fight for survival had suddenly become a fight for a cause, the very thing he had spent a decade trying to avoid. They journeyed on, a new sense of purpose settling over him. He was no longer just running. He was escorting her. He was her protector. The title she had given him felt less like an honor and more like a heavy, inescapable weight. Weeks bled into one another. The landscape grew more desolate, more poisoned. They crossed rivers that flowed with acidic sludge and saw the petrified forests of what must have once been a vibrant world. The signs of Axiom's pursuit were ever present. The distant glint of a scout ship, the discarded ration packs of a ground patrol. Valerius was still hunting them. He was not a man to give up. One harsh afternoon, as they navigated a narrow, treacherous canyon pass, they found it. A Kith settlement, or what was left of it. The structures were not built, but grown from the rock itself, flowing in graceful, organic curves. But they were silent, empty. Axiom had been here. Blast marks scarred the living stone. Crude graves were scattered among the homes. Lyra walked through the ghost town, her hand tracing the lines of the dead architecture. Kale felt her sorrow as a cold knot in his own chest. She stopped before a small, collapsed dwelling and knelt, gently moving aside rubble. She uncovered the small, skeletal remains of a Kith child, a carved toy clutched in its bony fingers. Lyra did not weep. She simply held the small toy, her body rigid with a grief so immense it seemed to draw all the heat from the air. Kale stood guard, his hand on his rifle, his heart a cold, hard stone. He had seen 1,000 atrocities in his career, had become numb to them. But this quiet, personal tragedy struck him with a force that surprised him. This was the cost of Cinderstone. This was the price of Forlag's ambition. That night, they made camp in the ruins. The air was heavy with ghosts. Kale was cleaning his rifle when Lyra came and sat opposite him by their small, shielded fire. She looked at the plasma scar on his shoulder, still a raw, ugly mark where the armor had melted to his synth skin. Then she touched a place on her own side, just below her ribs. She pulled aside her simple garment. There, on her pale, stone-like skin, was a puckered, vicious scar. It was not a clean wound from a blade, but the ragged, torn mark of an energy weapon, poorly healed. The capture wound. She looked from her scar to his, a silent acknowledgement of their shared pain, of the violence that had been inflicted upon them both by the same enemy. In that moment of shared vulnerability, he felt the last of his professional detachment crumble away. This was no longer Axiom's problem. It was his. He was bound to her cause, by a bond of blood and scars. The quiet was shattered by the scream of engines. Searchlights stabbed down from the canyon rim, pinning them in their unforgiving glare. A voice, amplified and distorted, boomed down at them. Nowhere left to hide. Kale. The chase is over. Valerius. He had found them. Troop transports descended on pillars of fire, landing at both ends of the canyon, cutting off any escape. Enforcers in their black armor rappelled down the cliff sides, their forms like spiders on a silken thread. They were surrounded, hopelessly outnumbered. Kale grabbed his rifle. "Get back to the caves," he yelled at Lyra, but she stood her ground, her face set like stone. The patterns on her skin began to glow with a fierce, dangerous light. The first wave of enforcers charged into the ruined village. Kale opened fire, his pulse rifle spitting methodical, precise shots. He dropped 3 of them before they could find cover, his movements economical and deadly. But there were too many. Lyra raised her hands, and the very ground bucked. Pillars of rock erupted from the canyon floor, slamming into the advancing troops, throwing them into the air. The earth itself was her weapon. A storm of dust and pebbles swirled around her, a protective vortex that deflected incoming fire. Valerius strode through the chaos, an oversized plasma cannon in his hands. He ignored the lesser skirmish, his eyes fixed on Kale. "Just you and me, Warden," he roared over the din of battle. The way it should have been years ago. Kale met his charge. Their fight was brutal and personal. Valerius fought with rage, his blows powerful but predictable. Kale fought with cold efficiency, parrying, dodging, using his opponent's momentum against him. They crashed through the fragile, ancient structures, their battle a desecration of the sacred ground. While he kept Valerius occupied, Lyra was a whirlwind of elemental fury. She was not a soldier. She was an avalanche, a lightning storm. She tore Axiom's war machines from the sky, twisted the barrels of their rifles into knots, and collapsed the canyon walls to block their advance. But Kale could see the toll it was taking. The light from her skin flickered, and a trickle of silver blood ran from her nose. She could not keep this up forever. He managed to disarm Valerius, and they fell to raw, physical combat. He landed a punch that cracked the commander's visor, and Valerius answered with a headbutt that sent stars exploding behind Kale's eyes. As they grappled in the dust, Kale heard a new sound, a low, ominous hum that grew steadily in volume. He glanced up. Forlag's personal shuttle was descending, hovering over the battlefield. A hatch opened in its belly, revealing the muzzle of a seismic resonance cannon. It was not aimed at them. It was aimed at the ground beneath the ruins. "If I can't have the secret, I will simply crack the planet open and take it." Forlag's voice shrieked over the comms, tinny and mad. A beam of pure sonic force, invisible to the eye, slammed into the canyon floor. The ground split open. A massive fissure raced through the ruins, swallowing homes, graves, and Axiom enforcers alike. The entire canyon groaned, threatening to collapse. The blast threw Kale and Valerius apart. Kale scrambled for purchase as the ground crumbled beneath him. He looked for Lyra. She was on her knees, her hands pressed to the ground, her body shaking violently. The weapon was not just attacking the planet. It was attacking her directly, through her connection to it. It was clear then. This was an unwinnable war. They could not fight Axiom's entire military machine. Every victory was temporary, every battle a step closer to their own exhaustion and the planet's demise. Forlag had the power to simply shatter the world to get what he wanted. Kale knew they had to escape. He fought his way back to Lyra, pulling her to her feet. "We have to go? Now." She looked at him, her black eyes filled with an agony that mirrored the tortured land around them. She nodded. Concentrating the last of her strength, she stomped her foot on the ground. A shock wave radiated outward, not of destruction, but of disorientation. The remaining enforcers clutched their heads, their systems shorting out. The seismic cannon on Forlag's shuttle sputtered and died. It was the opening they needed. Kale half carried her into the labyrinthine caves behind the ruins as the canyon began to collapse in on itself. Behind them, he heard Valerius screaming his name, a sound of pure, frustrated hatred that was soon swallowed by the roar of falling rock. They emerged miles away, on a high plateau overlooking the devastation. The dust of their battle rose like a funeral shroud. The stakes had been raised to an impossible height. The conflict now threatened to consume the entire planet, and they were the only two who stood in the way. In the aftermath, they found a hidden place, a deep, geothermal vent that led to a vast cavern untouched by Axiom's poison. Bioluminescent moss cast a soft, blue-green light over pools of crystal-clear water. It was a pocket of the old world, a sanctuary of peace in a world at war. Lyra was weak. Her light was dim, her movement slow. She knelt by one of the pools and drank deeply. Kale watched her, the terrible reality of their situation solidifying in his mind. They could not win by fighting. They could not win by running. Every path led to destruction. As she recovered some of her strength, she turned to him. She did not use charcoal this time. She pressed her palm to the damp cavern wall, and an image bloomed there, formed of glowing moss. It was the image she had shown him before, the web of the planet's life force. But this time, she showed him the heart of it, the place where all the lines converged. It was deep beneath the central mining facility, the place Forlag was trying to crack open. It was the planet's core nexus. She showed him a vision of herself, walking into that nexus. As she entered, the broken lines of the web began to reform, the light returning, pushing back the darkness of Axiom's corruption. But the energy required was immense, unstable. Her own form began to flicker, to come apart under the strain. Then, the vision changed. It showed another figure walking with her into the light. A human figure. This figure stood beside her, acting as an anchor, a conduit. Its body absorbed the violent, chaotic energy of the healing process, grounding it, allowing Lyra to complete her work. The vision was clear. As the planet healed, the conduit's body was consumed, not in fire, but in light, breaking down into its constituent parts and becoming one with the restored web. The vision faded, leaving only the soft glow of the moss on the wall. Lyra looked at him, her eyes holding a deep, sorrowful understanding. The solution had been revealed. A way to end the conflict, to save the world. But it required a sacrifice. Not her sacrifice, she was the cure. It required a mortal shield to bear the cost of its administration. It required him. Kale turned away and walked to the edge of a shimmering pool. He stared at his reflection in the water. The face that looked back was that of a stranger, older, harder, worn down by a life of meaningless violence. He thought of the wars he had fought for Axiom, the lives he had taken for a paycheck, the long, empty years spent guarding a dying rock. His life had been a series of contracts, of duties performed without belief. It had been hollow. Here, now, was the impossible choice. He could refuse, and they could both die in a futile last stand as Forlag cracked the planet apart. Or he could accept, and his hollow life would end with a single, meaningful act. He would die, but the planet, and Lyra, would live. His identity, his very body, would be erased, but his final action would create a lasting peace. He thought of the Kith-child's skeleton in the ruins. He thought of Lyra's quiet grief. He thought of the title she had given him. Protector. It was never just about protecting her. It was about protecting her world, her legacy, her hope. The internal deliberation was not a storm, but a quiet, final settling. The jaded veteran, the reluctant survivor, had found the one cause worth dying for. It was not a grand, heroic revelation. It was a simple, somber calculus of a life spent and a death with purpose. He walked back to her. He did not need to speak. She saw the decision in his eyes. He reached out and, for the first time, initiated the contact himself, placing his hand on her shoulder. It was a gesture of acceptance, of commitment. Lyra raised her own hand and gently touched the scar on his other shoulder, the one the drone had given him. A single, silvery tear, glowing with faint light, traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness for his fate, but of respect for his choice. In the silent, glowing cavern, deep within the heart of a dying world, they had made their pact. The journey back to the central processing facility was a grim pilgrimage. They moved with a singular, unswerving purpose, no longer hiding, but advancing. Cale felt a strange sense of calm, the peace that comes after a final, irrevocable decision has been made. He was a dead man walking, and it had set him free. They used the planet's own hidden pathways, ancient lava tubes, and subterranean rivers that Lyra knew as intimately as the lines on her own hand. They bypassed Axiom's patrols, emerging from a ventilation shaft into the very heart of the enemy's stronghold. The facility was on high alert. The seismic cannon's failure had driven Forlag into a paranoid frenzy. Enforcers patrolled every corridor. Cale and Lyra moved like ghosts through the machine, her powers now used not for overt destruction, but for subtle misdirection. She bent light to make them nearly invisible, muffled the sound of their footsteps, and planted false sensor readings in the security network. Their destination was the primary drill control room, which sat directly above the main shaft that led down to the planet's core, the Nexus. Forlag would be there, overseeing the final preparations to shatter the world. They reached the final corridor leading to the control room. It was guarded by a full platoon of Valerius's elite guard. There was no way to sneak past them. This was the final battleground. "I will create a path," Lyra said, her voice a soft whisper in his mind. "Be ready." She stepped out from their cover. The guards shouted in alarm, raising their weapons. But instead of attacking them, Lyra closed her eyes and reached out with her senses, not to the rock and earth, but to the facility itself. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the station's power core faltered. Emergency blast doors slammed shut throughout the sector, isolating the corridor. She had turned Axiom's fortress into a cage, trapping their enemies and themselves inside. Then she opened her eyes, and a wave of pure force, focused and precise, erupted from her, disabling the Enforcer's weapons systems. Their advanced rifles sparked and went dead. Their energy shields collapsed. They were reduced to nothing more than men in heavy armor. "Now, Cale," her thought echoed. He moved. He was not a soldier anymore, but an instrument of focused violence. He flowed through the disarmed Enforcers, his movements a brutal ballet of efficiency. He did not kill them. He disabled them, breaking limbs, shattering viewports, leaving a trail of incapacitated soldiers in his wake. The final doors to the control room slid open, and there they were. Administrator Forlag stood before a massive holographic display of the planet, his face pale and sweating. And beside him, his armor dented and scarred from their last encounter, was Valerius, a heavy-bore plasma pistol in his hand. Valerius grinned, a feral, broken thing. "I knew you'd come," he ignored Lyra, his obsessive hatred focused entirely on Cale. He raised his pistol. Cale didn't break stride. He threw his useless rifle at Valerius, a simple distraction, and closed the distance. The pistol fired, the bolt of plasma searing the air where Cale's head had been a millisecond before. He slammed into the commander, and they crashed into a bank of control consoles, showering the room in sparks. Their final fight was short and savage. There was no strategy, only desperation. Cale drove a combat knife into the weak point of Valerius's neck armor. The commander gasped, a look of shocked disbelief on his face, before collapsing. Cale rose, breathing heavily, and turned to face Forlag. The administrator was fumbling with a control panel, his hands shaking. "You're too late. The drilling sequence is automated. You can't stop it," he shrieked. "We are not here to stop it," Lyra's voice said, calm and clear, as she entered the room. She walked past the terrified administrator as if he were a piece of furniture and placed her hands on the central console. The holographic display of the planet dissolved, replaced by the swirling, living web of light she had shown Cale in the cavern. The great drill was already descending, a black spike of death aimed at the web's heart. "The path is open," she said, turning to Cale. "It is time." He nodded. He gave one last look at the chaos of the control room, at the body of his rival, at the cowering form of the man who had caused all this death. It all seemed small, insignificant. He walked with her to the edge of the drill shaft, a gaping maw that descended into the planet's depths. A maintenance elevator was docked at the edge. They stepped onto it, and Lyra guided it downward, into the screaming darkness. The descent was a journey through geology and time. They passed through layers of rock, strata of crystal, and finally, into a vast, open cavern where the air itself hummed with unimaginable energy. At the center of the cavern, floating in a sea of pure, white light, was the Nexus, the heart of Ashgar. The drill was approaching from above, its terrible grinding sound echoing through the chamber. Lyra stepped off the elevator and began to walk towards the light. "Stay with me," she projected. "Hold on to me. You are the anchor." Kale followed her. As they neared the Nexus, the energy washed over him, a physical force that threatened to tear him apart. It was like standing in the heart of a star. He gripped Lyra's hand, his knuckles white. Her touch was the only solid thing in the universe. They stepped into the light together. The sacrifice began. He felt a pain beyond all description, as every cell in his body was simultaneously ignited and unmade. His armor vaporized. His skin dissolved. He screamed, but he made no sound. He was being stripped down to his essential self, his consciousness laid bare. Through the agony, he held on. He focused on Lyra's hand, on her presence beside him. He became the conduit. The raw, chaotic energy of the planet's life force poured into him, and he grounded it, stabilized it, his own mortal form the price of that stability. He could feel Lyra drawing on that focused power, weaving it back into the planet, healing the wounds, reforging the broken web. The great drill above them shuddered and stopped, its power source overloaded by the wave of life erupting from the core. Throughout the facility on the surface, consoles exploded. Lights went out. The machines of Axiom, from the smallest servo to the largest excavator, fell silent. Kale felt his consciousness begin to fray. His memories, his identity, the man named Kale, were dissolving into the river of energy he was channeling. His last sensation was of Lyra's gratitude, a feeling of profound peace that washed over him, extinguishing the pain. He let go. He became part of the light. He became a part of the world he had saved. The war for Ashgar ended not with a bang, but with a sudden, stunning silence. The Axiom forces, their equipment dead, their command structure in chaos, stood dumbfounded as a soft, green light pulsed from the ground beneath their feet. The red dust seemed to settle, and for the first time in a generation, the air smelled clean. The hostilities ceased, not by treaty or surrender, but by a miracle they could not comprehend. 20 years passed. Ashgar was transformed. The red deserts were in retreat, slowly giving way to sprawling plains of hardy, blue-green grass. The petrified forests were dotted with the new growth of young, silvery-barked trees. The acidic rivers ran clear, and the sky was no longer a hazy brown, but a deep, brilliant violet. The planet was healing. Axiom Corporation was gone. Its local operations collapsed in the wake of the event they called the Silence. Their people had been evacuated, leaving behind their silent machines to be slowly reclaimed by the resurgent nature. A new human settlement had taken root, founded by a handful of Axiom workers who had chosen to stay, living alongside the Kith, who had emerged from their hidden sanctuaries. They were a new people, the children of Ashgar, living in peace. At the center of the continent, where the main Axiom facility had once stood, was a place of reverence. The humans called it Warden's Grove. The Kith called it the Heartwood. The old, ugly structures had been dismantled, and in their place grew a small forest of immense, silvery trees that were unlike any other on the planet. They did not grow from the soil, but from the ferrocrete foundation of the old control tower. At the center of the grove, a spring of pure, crystal-clear water bubbled up, its source deep within the planet's core. An old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, walked slowly into the grove. It was Thorn, the former station supervisor, one of the few who had stayed. He came here often. He leaned on his cane and looked at the central spring. The water shimmered with a soft, internal light, and the trees around it hummed with a faint, resonant energy. A young Kith woman, her skin the color of polished river stone, approached and stood beside him. She was the leader of her clan, born years after the Silence. "You are thinking of him," she said, her voice a soft melody, the words spoken in the shared language that had developed between their two peoples. Thorn nodded slowly. Always. I gave him the orders that day. Sent him to his post. I wonder if he knew. He knew, the Kith woman said with certainty. She knelt and dipped her hand into the glowing water of the spring. We can still feel him. He is not gone. He is the anchor. He is the roots of these trees, the coolness of this water. He is the silence that brought the peace. Thorn looked up at the canopy of the silver trees, their leaves rustling in the clean breeze. He remembered Kale, the jaded, cynical soldier who had lost his way. He thought about the man's final, silent choice. It had not been a glorious death in battle. It had been a quiet, profound act of becoming. He had not won a war, but had instead erased the reason for it. His sacrifice was not a memory. It was the living foundation of their new world. The protagonist was gone, his name a footnote in a forgotten corporate file. But the protector remained, a silent guardian woven into the fabric of the world he had saved, his legacy enduring in the somber, hopeful peace of a planet reborn.